Chapter 2. The room was dark, save for one glowing wall, upon which the tides of color ebbed and flowed as Alvin wrestled with his dreams. Part of the pattern satisfied him. He had fallen in love with the soaring lines of the mountains as they leaped out of the sea. There was a power and pride about those ascending curves. He had studied them for a long time, and then fed them into the memory unit of the visualizer, where they would be preserved while he experimented with the rest of the picture. Yet something was eluding him, though what it was he did not know. Again and again, he had tried to fill in the blank spaces, while the instrument read the shifting patterns in his mind and materialized them upon the wall. It was no good. The lines were blurred and uncertain, the colors muddy and dull. If the artist did not know his goal, even the most miraculous of tools could not find it for him. Alvin canceled his unsatisfactory scribblings and stared morosely at the three-quarters empty rectangle he had been trying to fill with beauty. On a sudden impulse, he doubled the size of the existing design and shifted it to the center of the frame. No, that was a lazy way out, and the balance was all wrong. Worse still, the change of scale had revealed the defects in its construction, the lack of certainty in those at first sight confident lines. He would have to start all over again. Total erasure, he ordered the machine. The blue of the sea faded. The mountains dissolved like mist, until only the blank wall remained. They were as if they had never been. As if they were lost in the limbo that had taken all Earth's seas and mountains ages before Alvin was born. The light came flooding back into the room, and the luminous rectangle upon which Alvin had projected his dreams merged into its surroundings, to become one with the other walls. But were they walls? To anyone who had never seen such a place before, this was a very peculiar room indeed. It was utterly featureless, and completely devoid of furniture, so that it seemed as if Alvin stood at the center of a sphere. No visible dividing lines separated walls from floor or ceiling. There was nothing on which the eye could focus. The space enclosing Alvin might have been 10 feet or 10 miles across, for all that the sense of vision could have told. It would have been hard to resist the temptation to walk forward, hands outstretched, to discover the physical limits of this extraordinary place. Yet such rooms had been home to most of the human race for the greater part of its history. Alvin had only to frame the appropriate thought, and the walls would become windows opening upon any part of the city he chose. Another wish, and machines which he had never seen would fill the chamber with the projected images of any articles of furniture he might need. Whether they were real or not was a problem that had bothered few men for the last billion years. Certainly they were no less real than any other imposter solid matter, and when they were no longer required, they could be returned to the phantom world of the city's memory banks. Like everything else in Diaspar, they would never wear out, and they would never change, unless their stored patterns were cancelled by a deliberate act of will. Alvin had partly reconstructed his room when a persistent bell-like chime sounded in his ear. He mentally framed the admission signal, and the wall upon which he had just been painting dissolved once more. As he had expected, there stood his parents, with Jesserac a little behind them. The presence of his tutor meant that this was no ordinary family reunion, but he knew that already. The illusion was perfect, and it was not lost when Arestin spoke. In reality, as Alvin was well aware, Ariston, Etania, and Jesserac were all miles apart, for the builders of the city had conquered space as completely as they had subjugated time. Alvin was not even certain where his parents lived among the multitudinous spires and intricate labyrinths of Diaspar, for they had both moved since he had last been physically in their presence. "Alvin," began Ariston, "it is just 20 years since your mother and I first met you. You know what that means. Our guardianship is now ended. and you are free to do as you please." There was a trace, but merely a trace, of sadness in Arreston's voice. There was considerably more relief, as if Arreston was glad that a state of affairs that had existed for some time, in fact, now had legal recognition. Alvin had anticipated his freedom by a good many years. "I understand," he answered. "I thank you for watching over me, and I will remember you in all my lives." That was the formal response. He had heard it so often that all meaning had been leached away from it. It was merely a pattern of sounds with no particular significance. Yet, "all my lives" was a strange expression when one stopped to consider it. He knew vaguely what it meant. Now the time had come for him to know exactly. There were many things in Diaspar which he did not understand, and which he would have to learn in the centuries that lay ahead of him. For a moment, it seemed as if Etanya wished to speak. She raised one hand, disturbing the iridescent gossamer of her gown, then let it fall back to her side. Then she turned helplessly to Jesserac, and for the first time, Alvin realized that his parents were worried. His memory swiftly scanned the events of the past few weeks. No, there was nothing in his recent life that could have caused this faint uncertainty, this air of mild alarm that seemed to surround both Arreston and Etanya. Jesserac, however, appeared to be in command of the situation. He gave an inquiring look at Arreston and Etanya, satisfied himself that they had nothing more to say, and launched forth on the dissertation he had waited many years to make. "Alvin," he began, "for 20 years, you have been my pupil, and I have done my best to teach you the ways of the city, and to lead you to the heritage which is yours. You have asked me many questions, and not all of them have I been able to answer. Some things you were not ready to learn, and some I did not know myself. Now, your infancy is over, though your childhood is scarcely begun. It is still my duty to guide you, if you need my help. In 200 years, Alvin, you may begin to know something of this city, and a little of its history. Even I, who am nearing the end of this life, have seen less than a quarter of Diaspar, and perhaps less than 1,000th of its treasures." There was nothing so far that Alvin did not know, but there was no way of hurrying Jesserac. The old man looked steadfastly at him across the gulf of centuries, his words weighed down with the uncomputable wisdom acquired during a long lifetime's contact with men and machines. "Tell me, Alvin," he said, "have you ever asked yourself where you were before you were born? Before you found yourself facing Etanya and Arreston at the Hall of Creation?" "I assumed I was nowhere, that I was nothing but a pattern in the mind of the city, waiting to be created, like this." A low couch glimmered and thickened into reality beside Alvin. He sat down upon it and waited for Jesserac to continue. "You are correct, of course," came the reply, "but that is merely part of the answer, and a very small part indeed. Until now, you have met only children of your own age, and they have been ignorant of the truth. Soon, they will remember, but you will not. So, we must prepare you to face the facts. For over 1 billion years, Alvin, the human race has lived in this city. Since the Galactic Empire fell, and the invaders went back to the stars, this has been our world. Outside the walls of Diaspar, there is nothing except the desert of which our legends speak. We know little about our primitive ancestors, except that they were very short-lived beings, and that, strange though it seems, they could reproduce themselves without the aid of memory units or matter organizers. In a complex and apparently uncontrollable process, the key patterns of each human being were preserved in microscopic cell structures actually created inside the body. If you are interested, the biologist can tell you more about it, but the method is of no great importance since it was abandoned at the dawn of history. A human being, like any other object, is defined by its structure. its pattern. The pattern of a man, and still more the pattern which specifies a man's mind, is incredibly complex. Yet nature was able to pack that pattern into a tiny cell, too small for the eye to see. What nature can do, man can do also, in his own way. We do not know how long the task took. 1,000,000 years, perhaps, but what is that? In the end, our ancestors learned how to analyze and store the information that would define any specific human being, and to use that information to recreate the original, as you have just created that couch. I know that such things interest you, Alvin, but I cannot tell you exactly how it is done. The way in which information is stored is of no importance. All that matters is the information itself. It may be in the form of written words on paper, of varying magnetic fields, or patterns of electric charge. Men have used all these methods of storage, and many others. Suffice to say that long ago, they were able to store themselves, or, to be more precise, the disembodied patterns from which they could be called back into existence. So much you already know. This is the way our ancestors gave us virtual immortality, yet avoided the problems raised by the abolition of death. 1,000 years in one body is long enough for any man. At the end of that time, his mind is clogged with memories, and he asks only for rest, or a new beginning. In a little while, Alvin, I shall prepare to leave this life. I shall go back through my memories, editing them, and canceling those I do not wish to keep. Then, I shall walk into the Hall of Creation, but through a door which you have never seen. This old body will cease to exist, and so will consciousness itself. Nothing will be left of Jesserac but a galaxy of electrons frozen in the heart of a crystal. I shall sleep, Alvin, and without dreams. Then, one day, perhaps 100,000 years from now, I shall find myself in a new body, meeting those who have been chosen to be my guardians. They will look after me as Areston and Etanya have guided you, for at first I will know nothing of Diaspar, and will have no memories of what I was before. Those memories will slowly return at the end of my infancy, and I will build upon them as I move forward into my new cycle of existence. That is the pattern of our lives, Alvin. We have all been here many, many times before, though as the intervals of non-existence vary according to apparently random laws, this present population will never repeat itself again. The new Jesserac will have new and different friends and interests, but the old Jesserac, as much of him as I wish to save, will still exist. That is not all. At any moment, Alvin, only 100th of the citizens of Diaspar live and walk its streets. The vast majority slumber in the memory banks, waiting for the signal that will call them forth onto the stage of existence once again. So we have continuity, yet change, immortality, but not stagnation. I know what you are wondering, Alvin. You want to know when you will recall the memories of your earlier lives, as your companions are already doing. There are no such memories, for you are unique. We have tried to keep this knowledge from you as long as we could, so that no shadow should lie across your childhood, though I think you must have guessed part of the truth already. We did not suspect it ourselves until 5 years ago, but now there is no doubt. You, Alvin, are something that has happened in Diaspar only a handful of times since the founding of the city. Perhaps you have been lying dormant in the memory banks through all the ages. Or perhaps you were created only 20 years ago by some random permutation. You may have been planned in the beginning by the designers of the city, or you may be a purposeless accident of our own time. We do not know. All that we know is this. You, Alvin, alone of the human race, have never lived before. In literal truth, you are the first child to be born on Earth for at least 10 million years.